Wanted to take a second and talk a little bit about Dismal Swamp, because a lot of people are wanting to know about Dismal Swamp and how to get there and what kind of car to drive. And they're saying, hey, we don't know what we'll do when we get there. Not sure how to find crystals in Dismal Swamp. They want to know tips or secrets. And so I'm going to share with you how to find crystals at Dismal Swamp. That's a cool one. So it's a pretty interesting place, and a lot of people want to know if there's a secret to finding crystals at Dismal Swamp. And the secret is that there is no secret. There's crystals from the top of the mountain to the bottom. So you can hike and you can surface collect and you can find crystals. Almost every time that I've gone out, in fact, every time I've gone out surface collecting, we've found crystals every single time. And I've done a lot of hiking. And usually when I go hiking out there at Dismal Swamp, I'll probably spend 3-4 hours on a hike, sometimes longer. But the traditional method of finding crystals at Dismal Swamp is digging. And the first time that I went to Dismal Swamp and dug, I spent 2 days with my daughter out there, and we were looking for this crystal. This is the exact crystal that we had envisioned in our minds. But we went out there and we camped and we dug for 2 days. I dug a hole 4 foot by 4 foot wide, and dug for 2 days, 4 foot deep, and we didn't find nothing. I found a little piece of smoky in the creek, but other than that, we didn't find any crystals. That was our first experience at Dismal Swamp. It was beautiful. We were the only people out there, so it was quiet and wilderness-like. We heard the coyotes howl at night, and it was a good experience. Really, really pretty up on the ridge. Well worth the drive and the beauty of the area. And the next year I went back. I did the same thing. Started a new hole from scratch, and 4 foot by 4 foot wide, 4 foot deep. And the first day I didn't find anything. The second day, at the bottom of the hole, I went back into the hole that I was digging, and I took my shovel and 2 scrapes, and this popped out of the very bottom of the hole. And it was in that layer. And what people may not know is that Dismal Swamp is an alluvial deposit. Now you can find crystals that have eroded out from rocks and don't have this matte finish, but these crystals that have the matte finish, they essentially got carved out of granite as glaciers came through and deposited these crystals. And so these are all deposited from that alluvial action from the glacier. And so the glacier's just pushing along, and as it's grinding up the granite and the quartz, it creates kind of these different layers underneath the glacier. They're kind of like the lubricant that slides along on top. And there'll be like a gravel layer. Underneath that layer, there'll be kind of a fine gray clay layer, which is just well pulverized granite and quartz layer. And essentially the crystals, they kind of lay in that gravel layer, but they also lay in dirt layers, like soft dirt layers. If you can kind of imagine these glaciers kind of pushing like a bulldozer, that soft dirt that they pushed in front of them down these valleys. And so there's crystals that you can dig that'll be in the top of the layer. They'll be a couple feet down in the layer, and they'll be all the way down to that clay layer, but they don't really happen beneath that clay layer. And that's my theory about digging and finding crystals. So I like to dig down to those clay layers, but you can find them in the sandy layers. You can find them in the kind of the brown reddish dirt layers. You can find them around the boulders. You can find them in vugs. You can find them freshly eroded out of well, fresh is relative, but essentially crystals that have eroded out from a pocket like this one here, or a vug in granite, and they're shiny because they eroded out and didn't have a chance to be tumbled in a creek or pushed under a glacier, and so they've got that shininess to them. And you can find clear quartz crystals, you can find smoky quartz crystals, but yeah, from the top of the mountain to the bottom. Now, I've also crawled one of the brooks or one of the creeks in the area from the top. I crawled it from the bottom to the top, and I'm not joking about crawl. Like, I literally, on hands and knees, I spent the entire day crawling that creek, crawling under giant boulders the size of buses and squirming, like getting wet, crawling, like squiggling through brush like a snake. And in that layer, I was able to find, some pretty good smoky quartz crystals as well that had eroded out of the boulders and were deposited in the creeks. And then as I got up towards the top of the creek, which was up, kind of towards the top of the mountain, I looked into this little waterfall, and there was this dark spot in the waterfall. And it was interesting because it just looked like a dark void. But in my mind, I'm like, is that a crystal in the back of this little waterfall? And I just reached into the waterfall, into that dark void, and I pulled this out. And so yeah, you can find them in the creeks, in the gravels of the creeks. And so I do tend to walk and scrape the creeks a little bit too. But generally, you're going to be looking in areas where they're around the large boulders, the large granite, because the erosion of that large granite and those vugs eroding out is what have deposited these crystals. Now, can you find vugs still with crystals in them? Yeah, you can. I've found them from time to time. I found some rather large crystal vugs. Most of them have been hunted out, and it's pretty impressive to think about the size of some of those crystals that were in those vugs. And some people, they talk about sifting. They may have a little more patience than I do. Generally, I'll dig, and then I'll rake my tailings, and it's always good to rake your tailings or rake other people's tailings, because you will always miss crystals up there. And I found some pretty good large crystals sitting right on the top of tailings piles before. And a lot of times you're digging maybe dirt that people have dug before, and there's still crystals in it that they've missed as well. But my attitude towards Dismal Swamp, I always call it a love-hate relationship. 50% of the time that you're digging, you're going to find nice stuff. 50% of the time, you're going to strike out. So actually, for the last 2 years, all my finds have been surface finds because my digging just hasn't been very successful for the last 2 years. And so, but I had great success with surface finds, hiking around, climbing through brush, and it's pretty thick brush, especially with the fires. The trees fall, and the brush is about 3-4 feet high in spots, so it can be challenging hiking, and it's very steep. But climbing around the giant boulder stacks and stuff like that. There are some really interesting giant boulder stacks where there are large deposits, which they have been dug out over the years. You can tell, you can see, almost like the tailings from the gold dredges, all these, rocks and stuff stacked up in some of those areas. Now, those areas are kind of difficult to get to. They do require a hike, but it's pretty interesting seeing the size of the quartz that were stacked into those drainages there, and imagining the crystals that people were able to pull out of there. Now, are there still crystals in there? Absolutely. Been in there, dug in there, pulled quartz out, surface collected in some of those areas, and that's around the largest granite stacks that you see on the mountain. So just hiking around the mountains, the crystals are everywhere. They literally are everywhere. There truly is no secret to Dismal Swamp. There's no secret location. There's popular locations, down on the bottom of the valleys, like down towards the swamp and around those areas that the glaciers deposited a lot of the alluvial crystals. But there literally are crystals from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain. So what should you bring if you're going to be digging up at Dismal Swamp? Well, you should bring a shovel. you should be ready to dig, and it's hard work. When I talk about digging for 2 days, literally, I'm putting in, 4, 5, 6 hours of digging a day. For a couple days, I'm taking breaks and stuff like that. Now these days, I'm maybe, get tired of digging after a little bit and go hiking or go to another area or something like that. But, a lot of times we're digging in hard ground and compact ground, and so you need a good shovel. You might want a rock hammer to kind of chip away at some of that harder dirt or something like that, something to pry rocks out of. And a good sign that you want to look for when you're digging is white quartz, right? Or, broken chunks of smoky quartz. But any chunks of quartz is a good sign. So matte white quartz, that's a good sign because these are mixed in with that. And so anytime that you're pulling out white quartz crystals, or anytime that you're pulling out a lot of gravel that's all kind of together in the bottom of a hole, that's a good sign that it hasn't been dug before. What kind of car should you take when you're going up to Dismal Swamp? Well, you're going to need a high clearance vehicle. You could potentially make it out there in a high clearance 2-wheel drive vehicle. You're going to want to have good traction tires. And if you're coming up the Featherville route, if you're going past Featherville and you're going up past Rocky Bar up to Trinity Ridge, then there's a really, really rough, steep patch that you got to drive over there, and it's probably best to have 4-wheel drive and good thick traction tires just because of the jagged rocks and stuff. But they're all dirt roads. It's graded all the way, almost all the way to the top, and then it's pretty rough for a few hundred yards up to the top of the Trinity Ridge. And so you need good traction. You need a higher clearance vehicle and good tires. You could drive up from Pine. There is another route up to Trinity Ridge from Pine, which may or may not be easier depending upon the weather and how roads have been treated by the weather. But that road could be a little bit easier for people to get up. I've seen adventurous folks take a trailer up to the top of the ridge. I imagine that's the route that they take to get up, is out of Pine on up to Trinity Ridge, because driving up that way from Featherville, I just couldn't see anybody towing a trailer over that. It's sketchy. You just wouldn't do it. So would I recommend taking a trailer up the top? Heck no. I was surprised when I saw someone had a trailer up there. I was pretty impressed. But no, I would not recommend taking a trailer if you're going to camp in the area, which you can, and it's beautiful camping up on the ridge or even down near the swamps. Beautiful camping. Just do tent camping, car camping, that type of thing. So anyway, that's the secrets, and that's what you need to know about Dismal Swamp. And this is the first really nice crystal that I found at Dismal Swamp. And when I found it in the bottom of that hole after digging for 2 days, after I'd already been out the year previous digging for 2 days, found nothing. I came home. I kind of looked at my daughter with excitement. She looked at me and she goes, "You got it?" I go, and then I showed it to her. She goes, "That's the one." Why? Because that's the crystal that we had envisioned in our minds that we were after. A nice big palm size smoky quartz crystal.